In the last set of stories, we heard lots of stories about characters who transformed. Princes became beasts, a boy changed into a fox, and poor girls turned into princesses. If fairy tales transform us, as we talked about in our last section of stories, the stories in this section are about how we triumph. We're going to hear stories in this section about besting evil powers. And one of the most prominent images of big evil in stories is the giant. If you go to Bohol Island in the Philippines, you'll find a mound of hills called the Chocolate Hills. They bump up like little odd cones, squished one beside the other, bubbling up out of the ground. Now, it's a strange geological formation, and the people there explain the hills this way. There were once 2 giants who threw stones and sand at each other. The stones and the sand became the hills. And after the battle, they became friends. But like most giants, they were forgetful. And they forgot to clean up the mess that their argument had made, leaving the chocolate hills in their wake. Giant legends are as old as the hills. Giants populate folklore and folk tales, as well as mythological texts, and for good reason. We all face giants. In folklore, giants are always big. Sometimes they seem impassable. They're usually scary, and they're usually not very smart, which means that they have a weakness. You can get past them if you keep your head. In the next story, see if you can count how many foes the hero faces and overcomes, and it's quite a lot. The giant is only the beginning, and some of the foes might just surprise you. This is the story of the Little Tailor. There once was a little tailor. And this little tailor worked at his little table by a little window in his little shop overlooking the narrow little street in the little village of Romandia in Germany. And one morning, he was smiling to himself. He was sewing up a pair of trousers, very large order, and he hummed to himself, and he looked over at his assistant in the corner. Wake up and finish that jacket and those trousers. And the apprentice, he went back to his sewing. Oh. And he saw, out of his open window, he saw walking down that narrow little street a little old woman, carrying a little basket and hollering, "Jams! Jams for sale!" Well, the little tailor, he called her up. And he was getting hungry, and the little old woman, she was excited because she thought a businessman like himself would surely purchase a fair amount. And so she hobbled up the steps, heaving her little basket through the door and over to the table, where the tailor, "Oh, I will take that one right there." And the woman pulled out her largest jar. And just as she was about to set it down, "Oh, just 2 spoonfuls, please." And he pulled out 2 slices of bread and a spoon, and before the woman could stop him, he had opened the jar, 1 scoop, 2 scoops, put 2 dollops of jam onto the bread, screwed the lid back on, and gave it back to her. 1, 2, 1, 2, draw copper coins. Danke vielmal, thank you very much. And he saw the woman out the door. This looks tasty. But he saw the pair of trousers on the table unfinished. And he saw the young man in the corner asleep again, and he knew that he had to finish his work. Wake up, young man. And he decided he would eat when he was finished. Stitch, 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 stitch. And when he heard, through the open window, bzzz, "Well, who invited you?" And one fly after another came swarming onto his jam. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Well, finally, he had had enough. And he set down the needle, and he set down the trousers, and he reached for a piece of cloth, and whackity! He cracked the claw through the air, and there 7 flies died and fell down right there into the jam. And he counted the flies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, my. And he was so proud of himself that he sewed up a little belt for himself with golden thread that said 7 with 1 stroke. And he looked around his little shop, the apprentice, back there in the corner, and he looked at those flies, and he said to himself, "You are quite a man. Now you have to go out into the world." And he tied that belt around his waist, the belt that said 7 with 1 stroke, and he walked to the door. And he was still hungry, and the jam was ruined, and so he took a little piece of cheese, and he put it into his pocket, and he was off. And he went walking down the road, and as he walked, he came across a bird. And he scooped up that bird, and he put that bird into his other pocket, and he kept on walking, and he walked, following his nose until the road arced up along a mountainside, and there, at the very peak, he saw a huge giant. And the little tailor walked up and said, "Well, look at you. You're looking out into the world. Well, I am out going into the world." And the giant, he looked down at him. "You are a miserable creature." Well, the little tailor opened his coat to show the giant his belt. "You can read for yourself what kind of man stands before you." And the giant read 7 with 1 stroke. And he thought the tailor had killed 7 men, not 7 flies. And so instead of trying to crush him right away, he decided that he would test this man to see if he was really as mighty as he said that he was. And so the giant, he took out a rock, and he squeezed it, and he squeezed it until whoop, whoop, water came dripping out of that rock. "There! You are not as strong as that!" Well, the tailor, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out that cheese, and he held up that hand and squeezed that cheese. It was soft cheese until whoop, 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 liquid came running out of his hand. "That beats yours, doesn't it?" Well, the giant was confused. So he picked up another stone, and he threw it up higher and higher, way up into the air until it was just a speck in the sky. And they could barely hear as it hit the ground way far away. "Now, try that if you can." Well, the tailor, he reached into his other pocket and pulled out that bird. And he reached back, and he threw that bird up into the air, and up it went. And they listened, and it didn't make a sound. "Yeah, that beats yours. Mine didn't even come down into the ground." Well, the giant was confused and astounded. And the giant had moved now, so the tailor walked on by him. And the giant, well, he decided to follow him. And pretty soon, they came to a cherry tree. And that giant, he bent that cherry tree down so that the tailor could just reach the fruit. And then the giant let go. And the tailor sailed, thump, and landed on his feet. "Ho, ho! See, you are not as strong as to hold on to even that twig." "Oh, no, I jumped over the tree because huntsmen were shooting at me in the bushes." Well, the giant was confused, he was astounded, and he was starting to get annoyed. "Well, I bet you can't carry this tree." And he ripped another tree out of the ground, up by the roots, and started to hand it over to the tailor. "Oh, I bet I can carry that tree farther than you can. Let's carry it together, and we will see who tires out first." So the giant, he took the trunk, and he led the way. And the little tailor, he pretended to pick up the branches in the rear, but as the giant turned around and began to carry that trunk end, the tailor hopped onto the branches and was carried along on the ride. And after a while, that giant, he got tired. And he set that trunk down, and the tailor, he hopped down and grabbed some of those branches as if he had been carrying them the whole time. And the giant turned around. "You mean you are not tired yet?" "Well, I have killed 7 with 1 stroke. You think a little tree would tire me out?" "Not by a long shot." Well, the giant was confused, he was astounded, he was annoyed, and he was tired. Come on, little man. You come home with me." And so the giant took him home to his cave, where he slept with the other giants deep, deep in the forest. And the giant put the tailor into a big, giant bed. "Good night, little man," said the giant, and he pretended to sleep. Well, the tailor felt so small in that bed. This was his first night away from his little home and on the narrow little street and in the narrow little town where he came from, so he crawled up out of bed, and he found a nice, cozy corner, and he fell asleep. And he woke up not too long from then with a wallop-a sound, and it was the giant taking his club and whacking the bed where the tailor himself had been resting not an hour earlier. Well, the tailor decided to get away from there, and he went outside the cave, and he waited in the forest until daybreak. And all the other giants came out from the cave, and the giant who had walloped the tailor was boasting about how he had killed that fool of a man, when all of a sudden, out from around the trunk of a tree, "Oh, hello, giant. I had a lovely sleep. I thought I felt a little gnat buzzing at me, but in the middle of the night, but it must have been nothing. I have never slept better." Well, the rest of the giants thought that the tailor had survived a walloping and lived to tell the tale. The strongest man they'd ever seen, and they all, they ran away and never came back to that part of the forest. And the tailor kept on walking. And soon he came out of the woods, and there was a castle. And he walked up to the castle, into the courtyard, and he was so tired from the sleepless night in the giant's cave that he curled up right there on the grass and fell fast asleep. And all of the townspeople and the royal servants, they all came around and they read what was on his belt: 7 with 1 stroke. And they were confused. 7 with 1 stroke? That little man killed 7 with 1 stroke? My, he must be stronger than he looks. We must tell the king. And they ran to tell the king, and the king, well, he was amazed. And the king ran out and he woke up the tailor and asked, "Do you want to join my army?" Well, the tailor, he said, "Yes, yeah, I would." And so the king immediately accepted him into his service, and he gave him a special place to sleep. Well, it didn't take long for the rest of the king's knights to start to despise the little tailor. "A man who could kill 7 with 1 blow? Why, he could kill all of us if we disagreed with him." And so they threatened the king that they would leave his service if he didn't get rid of this man. And the king, well, he was starting to like this man. He didn't want to loosen his entire army over him, though, so he didn't dare to kill him. He had killed 7 with 1 stroke, after all, so he thought of a plan. He told the tailor, "You are our bravest and our strongest. I need you to go out into the forest. There are 2 giants who have been robbing and murdering and burning people. No one can get rid of them because they tear anyone apart who gets near them. If you can kill these 2 giants, you may have my only daughter as your wife, and half my kingdom as a dowry." Well, off went the little tailor with 100 of the king's men to help. And they came to the edge of the woods, and the tailor told the army, "Oh, wait here, I will handle these giants alone." And he went out into the woods. And it wasn't long before he heard... He heard the 2 giants snoring so loudly that they shook the trees, and there they were in the clearing, fast asleep. Well, the tailor, he looked around, and he took a few rocks into his pockets, and he climbed up into one of the trees, and he took a rock, and he threw it at one of the giants, clonk, and it whacked him right on the forehead. "Wah! Why did you hit me?" Well, the other giant woke up. "I did not hit you, you dirty little muckamuckin," and he went on back to sleep. Well, the tailor, he took another rock, woo-hoo, clonk, and it hit the other giant on the head, and it woke him up. "Why are you hitting me now? I did not hit you. Why are you waking me up?" And a few moments later, the giants were wrestling with each other and beating on each other, and they grabbed trees and they started to wallop each other with them. And the tailor was glad that they didn't grab the tree where he was sitting. Wah-wham! Wah-wham! And the giants, they beat each other to death. Pull, pull. And when he was sure that they were dead, the tailor, he climbed down, And he dusted himself off, and he took out his sword, and he gave them a few wounds to look like it was officially his kill. And then he walked out of the woods. There you go, 2 giants. And so they won't bother you anymore. Easy. Well, the knights, they went into the clearing. There lay the giants, and there were the trees uprooted, and there was the little tailor with nary a scratch on him. Well, they were confused. They were astounded, annoyed, and angry. And when they all came home triumphant, the king, well, he was annoyed and angry too. He had no intention of giving the little tailor half his kingdom and his daughter. Very well, but young knight, there is a unicorn that has been damaging fish and people in the forest. You capture that unicorn, and you may have my daughter. So the tailor went out with 100 men and a piece of rope. And he told the men to wait at the edge of the forest. And he walked out into the forest, and there he could hear the unicorn thrashing about. Well, suddenly it appeared, beautiful and terrifying, with that horn pointing straight at him. And it started to charge. And he just stood there. It came closer and closer, and he just stood there. It came closer and closer. He just stood there. And finally it was about to hit him, and he dodged away behind a nearby tree. And there was the unicorn. He couldn't stop, and wham! His horn stuck right into the middle of that oak tree. Well, the tailor, he took the rope, and he put it around the unicorn's neck and tied that rope to the tree. And he walked back out of the forest and back to the king. And the king said, "Knight, now you must go and kill the wild boar that is running around in the forest." Well, off he went, told the 100 huntsmen to wait at the edge of the forest, walked in, and he could hear that boar. And the boar came foaming at the mouth, gnashing its teeth, ready to trample him into the ground. Well, the tailor, well, he took off running, and he ran, and the boar, he came closer and closer and closer, and there in the middle of the forest, wouldn't you know it, there happened to be a little chapel where people often stopped to sit and rest. And the tailor, he ran into that chapel, and the boar ran after him, and whoop! The tailor jumped out of one of the windows, and the boar couldn't clear the window. And around the little chapel the tailor ran, and wham! Slammed the chapel door shut behind the boar. And he walked out of the forest. And back to the king, 100 huntsmen following behind him. "Dear king, I have killed your giants, captured your unicorn, trapped your boar. Now, give me your daughter's hand in marriage." Well, the king had no choice. And it was a lovely wedding. And they were married together and living in the castle, and everything seemed as if it were going to end happily ever after, until one night. The princess, who wasn't really happy about this whole arrangement, she was awake one night, lying beside her husband, when he rolled over and talked in his sleep. "Young man, wake up. Wake up and finish sewing the pocket on that jacket and those trousers." And the princess thought, "I have him now." And the next morning she ran to the king, her father, and told him what she had heard. "He is not really a knight at all. He's just a tailor. There is nothing to be afraid of. You could kill him now if you wanted to." But the king decided to wait until the next night. And he told his daughter to open the door to your room while he is asleep. And he would post some servants outside the door, and when the tailor was deeply asleep, the servants would do away with him. Well, it just so happened that the weapons bearer to the king heard their plan. And he liked the tailor, so he went and he told the tailor the plan that the king and the princess had been scheming. And the tailor was so grateful that he told his friend not to worry, that he knew what to do. And the night came, and the tailor started breathing deeply and pretended to be asleep. And the princess, she got up, and she crept over to the door, opened the door, and she crept back into bed. And the tailor, he began to snore. And the servants outside the door, they were ready to strike. And then, out of a loud snore, he said so loudly that it could be heard all the way down the hall, young man, wake up. Wake up and finish sewing that jacket and those trousers. I have slain 7 with one stroke. Outsmarted 1 giant, killed 2 more giants, captured a unicorn, and trapped a wild boar. Do you think I am afraid of those 2 fellows waiting outside my door?" But when the men heard the tailor's words, they fled as if the wild hosts of Hades were after them, and nobody wanted to do anything to him after this. Thus, the tailor remained a king for the rest of his life. Who knew that unicorns could be so fierce? This version of The Little Tailor is adapted from the 1857 version by the Brothers Grimm. And they borrowed the story from a much older source from 1557 called Der Wegkützer by Martinus Montanus. And it's no surprise that we find tales like The Ingenious Little Tailor coming out of 16th century Germany. This was the age of the Renaissance, when literature turned away from superstition and divine intervention to solve our problems, and towards reason and the power of humans to solve many of their own problems. Now, think about it. The little tailor, he outsmarts and outwits all of his opponents, from flies to giants, from kings to unicorns, a boar, even his own murderous wife. And we also see themes common to both the Renaissance and to earlier medieval times, such as the hunt for the unicorn. However, in those days, unicorns weren't imagined to be snuggly pets. They were wild creatures. They were armed with a deadly weapon and with a penchant for piercing through men, and they could only be tamed by an innocent young girl. The medieval tapestry series, The Hunt for the Unicorn, it famously and beautifully shows how deadly unicorns were thought to be in those days. And like many Jack tales, the story starts out with what we call dramatic irony. It's that literary device where an audience knows something that the characters in the story don't know. And so what has Jack killed? Flies. Now we know Jack really hasn't killed 7 giants. In the beginning of the story, we think that we're smarter than Jack. And we can see that Jack isn't a giant killer, and we worry for him when he goes up against the first real giant. But Jack believes in himself. He thinks he's done something important. He's killed 7 flies with 1 stroke. Often small victories give us the courage we need to face bigger challenges. Jack's victory gives him the courage to go out and do things that are really impressive, to outsmart and to kill giants and unicorns. Was there a similar turning point moment in your life? A time when you faced a challenge and defeated it? Maybe you noticed your child or your parent doing something great, and you commented on how wonderful their action was. Maybe you even told the story of their great deed at the dinner table that night. Now, this is the modern-day version of cavemen sitting around the fire telling heroic battle stories and painting about them on the cave walls. How has that story of your greatness traveled with you? Now, you may not have made a sash, although wouldn't that be great? Sometimes we get a sash from others. We earn a diploma or an achievement certificate or an Olympic ribbon. The little tailor makes his own belt or sash. And as silly as it seems at the outset of the story, it's the belt as the memory of his initial great deed that propels him into the adventure. And instead of wearing a sash on the outside or a belt, you carry that memory of your great accomplishment around inside. It's like a magical object that you carry with you. And what happens when you go out into the world? You're empowered. You're ready to face giants. The tailor tells a story to himself, 7 with 1 blow. And that story empowers him to go out and to do great things. Now, this is part of what Wonder Tales do for us. They are stories that give us power to imagine that our small victories are great, so that we can become great. But we have to see our victory first in our imagination. The tailor eventually becomes king, which is a common theme in fairy and folk tales. Someone utterly common being transformed into someone special. and usually someone without power, gaining power. The commoner will usually work with the dominant order to achieve power. He's not a revolutionary. He's an ordinary guy who winds up in extraordinary circumstances. The tailor doesn't do away with the feudal system and the idea of kingship. He works within that system to become king. Stories where Jack outsmarts and upends a higher authority, whether it's someone in political authority like the king or something physically overwhelming like the giant. Now, these stories give us permission to feel the typical human resistance to authority and dominance, and that's a healthy thing. In medieval times, this sense of angst against the ruling authorities and the idea of the peasant becoming king, well, this was ritualized into annual feasts or carnivals in which religious and political figures were mocked by the common folk without fear of punishment. Now, think what it might be like if you could dress up in a silly costume and pretend to be one of your teachers or even one of your parents. Now, that's what this kind of feast would be like if we held one today. The medieval French people loved their carnivals for many of the reasons that we love jack tales. In this imaginary world that's been created, anything is possible. Any one of us could become more than others expect us to be. Even if we're small, we can still best evil powers. Now, these stories usually start with a person who has little stature, figuratively as well as literally. He's a tailor. He's not very high on the social status scale. And he's a little tailor, not a tall man, but a short one. And he conquers something smaller than himself, flies on bread and jam. And feeling quite proud of that, he has the courage to leave. And what does he come up against? Not flies, but a giant. Now, the idea of giants is very old. In Norse mythology, the world of men was formed from a battle between the god Odin and the giant Ymir. And it's reminiscent of the Chocolate Hills legend in the Philippines that we heard earlier. Stories from the biblical books of Genesis and Numbers speak of a time back in the days of the Nephilim, back in the days of giants who still lived in Canaan when the Israelites reached that place. The book of Enoch writes of giants who were children of rebellious angels and humans. And the purpose of the great flood was, in part, to get rid of these evil giants. In one tradition, giants come from the line of Cain, who, according to Genesis, murdered his brother Abel and was condemned to walk the earth despised. The biblical story of David and Goliath is about a small man, strengthened by his faith, who kills the giant Goliath with only a slingshot. In our lives, giants take many forms. Sometimes the most insidious giants, well, they're not the boulders in the road. It's the things in my mind that tell me I can't get past. Words of doubt or fear that spread deep inside you. What are the giants in your life? How have you gotten past the giant in the road? Jack teaches us some important lessons about how to handle it when a giant blocks the way. You outsmart him. When giants battle, stay out of it. When a unicorn charges you, dodge. When a wild boar chases you, trap him. Perhaps the most important lesson comes at the very end of the story, when the servant warns him that the king and his own wife are plotting to kill him. When you get a warning, do something. Don't ignore the warning signs around you. Don't put off a homework assignment. Don't brush off that chest pain as indigestion. When you get a warning, do something. The little tailor may climb hills and mountains and trees, but he always stayed close to solid ground. Now, in our next lecture on besting evil foes, we'll go giant hunting with Jack again. This time, up the beanstalk and into another world. And we'll learn how this famous beanstalk has its own folkloric significance across cultures as the tree of life.